This morning, Israel struck Iran, taking out their top military leadership, their nuclear scientists, and their facilities for developing atomic bombs. US cities have been hit by major rioting, especially Los Angeles, and the ownership of significant seagates is up in the air in Europe and Asia. We'll look at all this and more on today's Trumpet World.
Moments ago, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, a targeted military operation to roll back the Iranian threat to Israel's very survival. This operation will continue for as many days as it takes to remove this threat. For decades, the tyrants of Tehran have brazenly, openly called for Israel's destruction. They've backed up their genocidal rhetoric with a program to develop nuclear weapons. In recent years, Iran has produced enough highly enriched uranium for 9 atom bombs. 9. In recent months, Iran has taken steps that it has never taken before, steps to weaponize this enriched uranium. And if not stopped, Iran could produce a nuclear weapon in a very short time. It could be a year, it could be within a few months, less than a year. This is a clear and present danger to Israel's very survival.
So that was Benjamin Netanyahu earlier this morning on Israel's strikes. First up, we have Mihailo Zekic, our correspondent covering the Middle East. Mihailo, what did Israel just do?
Well, I like to say Israel just made a nuclear deal with Iran, the best kind of nuclear deal. You get rid of the nukes whether they like it or not. Overnight, Israeli jets flew across the Middle East, attacked dozens of sites around Iran. You remember last year that how Israel took out Iran's air defenses. This time they were basically unopposed because of that. They haven't had a chance to regroup, the Iranians, that is. What they actually hit, they hit at least 15 separate sites in Tehran for various different reasons. Some of these places that they had also hit in the rest of the country are quite famous. A nuclear enrichment site at Natanz, that's one of Iran's main ones. The other nuclear enrichment site at Fordow, Arak, which is where there's a heavy water plant. Parchin, the undeclared nuclear site that Iran has been working on. And there's also been several important figures assassinated. Apparently Israel tried to take out all of Iran's top brass, a la Hezbollah. We don't know exactly how many are still alive, but these ones are more or less confirmed are dead. Hossein Salami, the head of the the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Mohammad Bagheri, who's the military chief of staff and basically the second most powerful person in Iran's military, aside from the supreme leader. The deputy commander of the armed forces, Ghulam Ali Rashid. And Mohammed Mehdi Tehranchi and Fayendun Abbasi, who might not be that familiar, but they are two extremely important scientists that were working on Iran's nuclear program. Aside from the jet strikes, you can imagine with some of these assassinations as well, Mossad also carried out ground operations, including attacking several facilities. So this was basically an all-out, from every angle you can expect, short of declaring a formal state of war and Israel launching its own nuclear missiles, an all-out attack on Iran.
So this was bigger than their attack last year?
Very much so. Last year was basically attacking the systems that were supposed to defend everything that they attacked this time around. But last year, all that nuclear infrastructure, as we've been covering on this show quite regularly, has not only been attacked, but basically going full steam ahead. And there are reasons to suspect that circumstances were forcing Israel to do this sooner rather than later, because Iran was about to massively expand those operations, including with nuclear facilities so underground, so deeply entrenched that even U.S. bunker busters would not have been able to get to them.
The other big question then is, how will Iran respond? We did have reports that Iran had sent 100 drones towards Israel. There's not been any evidence of those arriving, so either they were shot down or intercepted, or those reports were false. Earlier, Israel said to all of its citizens, stay near bomb shelters. Right now, they've still, as I understand it, cancelled everyday business, but they've lifted that stay near bomb shelter order. So it seems like fear of an imminent Iranian strike back on Israel has receded. What is Iran expected to do?
Well, I'll say this much, that 100 or so drones that they sent over, and it has been confirmed the IDF has been shooting them down, that's less, like, by several times of the response they sent, say, when Israel assassinated famous IRGC people in Syria or whatnot. Iran has been keeping their cards quite close to their chest, but they have suggested some bigger things are coming, and Israel has also said this is only the first stage in what's going to be continuing later. So we'll almost certainly see, at the very least, much larger drone and missile attacks. At this point, Iran has a much fewer toys to play with than they had, say, this time last year. Hezbollah's out of the picture.
Right, Hezbollah even said, we're not getting involved.
Syria's completely switched sides. Hamas is still around, but they're obviously throwing everything they have already. The Houthis are still causing problems, and they certainly... I mean, the U.S. just made that deal with the Houthis that we talked about on this program before, and they have all their ballistic missiles left. That could definitely be an avenue that they could hit Israel with, but it's too early to tell, at least time of recording.
So we've been talking a lot about America's efforts to get a nuclear deal with Iran in recent weeks. One of the big questions is, how involved was America on this? Did they know? Did they approve? Did they help? And again, we're not going to have all the facts, so we'll take all of the caveats as a given. What do we know about America's response to this?
Well, we could actually let the American news media tell it for itself. This is clip one.
Yeah, I just spoke to President Trump. One thing, the president was aware of Israel's action before it happened. There were no surprises here. But he gave me a quote. He said, Iran cannot have a nuclear bomb. We're hoping to get back to the negotiating table. We'll see. There are several people in leadership in Iran that will not be coming back. Now, the president, I know, has spoken to Prime Minister Netanyahu several times in recent days. As I mentioned before, the Trump administration reached out to a key Middle Eastern ally beforehand to acknowledge this strike was going to happen, but that the U.S. was not involved in the strike, but the goal still to get Iran back to the negotiating table. There was this building frustration about what Iran was doing at that negotiating table with Steve Witkoff, the Middle East envoy. He was scheduled again for Sunday. Looks like, obviously, that may change the dynamic there, whether that moves forward at all. Depends on what Iran does in response. The president told me he's, looking to see what the retaliation may be. CENTCOM is on high alert. The U.S. will will help defend Israel if needed.
So that was a bit of a longer quote there from Brett Baer after speaking with President Trump, talking to Fox. That's basically all the president has said publicly on what he knew. But from that, we can put together a few pieces together with some other stories and leaks coming from elsewhere. So the U.S., I won't say almost certainly, they did know ahead of time that this was going to happen.
Right, I remember writing the morning brief yesterday, and there were all of these signs that American news, I think, was coming. They were pulling people out of embassies, out of military bases. British government issued a maritime shipping warning. State Department employees told not to leave Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. So they knew something was coming.
No, not just something was coming. They looks like knew pretty well ahead of time what exactly was coming, especially when you look at which particular embassies, like the one in Baghdad, was being evacuated, etc. But the question is, did the U.S. support this? Well, as you heard from the clip there, they're getting ready to go and protect Israel. CENTCOM is, at least, depending on what the retaliation is. And other channels have announced that they're gearing up for, if Iran hurts Israel, then you can expect us to intervene somehow. There was talk of President Trump pressuring Prime Minister Netanyahu to not do this, that the nuclear negotiations have a chance, that we need to move forward. The very fact that this story was leaked to like the New York Times and Axios ahead of time by the U.S. government suggests that there was at least somebody high up trying to derail this whole thing, to take the surprise out, to make Netanyahu look bad. But Axios reported today, they have some very good sources there on what's going on with Israel, was that this apparently all was a ruse, and that all these public pressures coming from the White House are really just trying to send noise over to Iran to get them to get off their guard. And that one anonymous Israeli official told Axios, quote, "We had a clear U.S. green light." And considering President Trump has been saying with these nuclear negotiations, there is an option B if Iran doesn't take our olive branch. Like, we don't want to do it, but this is on the table. And he has hinted that that means just letting Israel go in and do whatever they wanted. That this would be fulfilling Trump's previous pledges to that. So this could very well be part of the equation.
So the Axios report isn't saying that the entire nuclear negotiation was a ruse to get Iran to get its guard down, but it is saying that when Donald Trump had his red lines in these nuclear negotiations, he was serious about those red lines, and when Iran refused to compromise, he gave Israel the green light to attack, and then this week has made positive noises and has talked about meeting on Sunday, and those positive noises this week have been a deliberate attempt to mislead Iran.
That's from what all indication we can understand.
So Iran is a key place for Bible prophecy. One of our booklets that we talk about a lot on this show, The King of the South, there's so much in there about Iran that it has an Iranian flag on the front cover. Radical Islam led by Iran, that book shows, is this King of the South that's talked about in Daniel chapter 11. And we focus so much on Iran because it plays such a key role in end time events. And what happens in Iran is a vital stepping point on the road to the return of Jesus Christ. And so there's a lot of quite exciting prophecy bound up in what is happening in Iran. And Mr. Fleury has been talking about Iran since the early 90s. Even back then, most of the focus was on Iraq and Iraq's nuclear program. And his focus was much more on Iran and the way that they dominated through radical Islam and spread their influence through proxy groups just matched very well the description of the King of the South. And so he was focused on Iran playing that role. So given that we're focused on what is happening here, how do these strikes play into Bible prophecy?
Well, the particular prophecy you're referencing is in Daniel chapter 11, which speaks of, at the time of the end, there will be a king of the south that shall push at him, the king of the north, which, for those that aren't familiar, you could look at our booklet, The King of the South. We could put a link in that in the show notes on how to get a free copy. That's speaking of Iran pushing at a European power, and you follow the prophecy, you get to Daniel 12, verse 1, that speaks of a time of trouble such as never was a nation, even to that same time. Mr. Fleury has talked about this being a worldwide cataclysm of nuclear war. Other prophecies, like in Matthew 24, corroborate that. But it all starts with a push, a provocation from Iran. And Mr. Fleury has said that Iran's nuclear program has a great deal to do with that. The King of the North is obviously not the United States. We don't expect there to be war between America and Iran. Again, the King of the South can elaborate more. This is talking about a European power. But the very fact that you have this really unstable regime that has such an extreme ideology developing these weapons certainly will factor into this. What happens to Iran's nuclear program going forward? As you mentioned, we're still waiting for a lot of that news to come out. But with that being said, I mean, it's easy to look at what's going on in Iran right now, not just with the nuclear program, but also with losing their proxies in Hezbollah and Syria, and think, oh, Iran's just a big pushover. Israel can come in their little country and do whatever they want. Iran's not much of a threat. The fact that Israel is doing these things is because they see Iran as a threat, and Iran almost certainly knew that this was always going to be an option at some point, and you can be sure that they have other ways, like we mentioned earlier, of trying to attack Israel and building up back that strength to the point where they could fulfill that prophecy. Now, this is very much unconfirmed, but I have heard rumblings that Iran may have acquired nuclear weapons from another party instead of creating their own, purchasing them from another unstable country and saving them.
Probably North Korea then. Or Pakistan.
Pakistan, Kazakhstan used to have a lot of weapons, and they all of a sudden disappeared, and they're a Muslim country. And that they're just keeping them in some other country, like in some other borders, until a necessary time comes upon. And if all that's true, again, it's unconfirmed, this is just rumblings that analysts have said, this would be the time for them to bring it out. So just because you see Iran weakened right now, that doesn't mean they don't have a lot of tricks up their sleeve, and that doesn't mean they're any less dangerous. One other thing that I'd like to tie in with Bible prophecy in this is Another prophecy we focus on quite a bit is the relationship between the United States and Israel. And
Well, maybe before we get there, I just wanted to bring in one more aspect on this, on what you were saying about Iran. 'Cause just hearing you, it reminded me of some of what we wrote in the aftermath of 9/11 and the way that America went after Afghanistan and then Iraq and didn't confront Iran. And Mr. Hilliker, for example, had an article in November 2001, The Head of the Snake, that just talks about the way that Iran is the head of the terrorist snake, all of its terror infrastructure, etc. But he wrote, the threat is clear, but will the US go after Iran? Not likely. Certainly not like the King of the North will. And he talked about the difficulties in fighting Iran. And he said, thus America was forced to confront the issue using clever half measures. And ultimately concluded by saying America lacked the will to deal with the problem and to go in there and take care of radical Islam in Iran. And so by refusing to deal with the problem, by dealing with it with half measures, it keeps getting worse, it keeps getting worse. And ultimately, Europe's going to step in there and deal with it. And I think you can see something similar now. I mean, what you've been laying out during our interview is that this is actually a pretty good time to completely take care of the problem in Iran. That there is a window of opportunity where Hezbollah is created by Israel largely, but Hezbollah is down for the count, much weakened, not the tool for Iran that it used to be. I mean, Hezbollah was arguably the most capable terrorist group on the planet for some period in time, and now severely weakened. Iran is out of Syria. You've got an opportunity to, and Israel has done a lot of damage, and it seems like it's going to be left at that. And okay, if we compare this to, say, the Biden administration, there is more strength there. You could certainly see if Barack Obama were still in power or ruling behind someone like Joe Biden, he may well have found a way to scupper the entire thing, leak all of the details to Iran or ahead of time, something like that. So great, okay, there's more strength there, but America's not going in there and bringing about getting rid of the mullahs in Iran. Israel, I think they have fewer resources. It's harder to blame them. I mean, you look at, say, how the entire world has turned against them for dealing with Gaza. If they really started to deal with Iran, they would have a lot of opposition from the entire planet. So, but still, perhaps there is more strength there. Certainly, if they were relying on God to protect them, there could be more strength there. And I think that's something we'll pick up in just a minute. But you have an opportunity, and Iran is being dealt with at best half measures. This will deal them a blow. This may slow them down, but they're not using this. Nobody is using this opportunity to get rid of the mullahs and to get rid of the head of the terrorist snake. And so, by confronting Iran in this manner, they're sticking around, and they're still going to play that role that is talked about in Daniel 11. And ultimately, they're not going to be stopped until they push very firmly against Europe, and Europe kind of astonishes them and astonishes the world with a very rapid decapitation strategy. They really come in. It talks about in Daniel 11, 40, 41. They come in like a whirlwind. They come in with a great amount of terror, and they really do annihilate Iran. So I think the fact that this is not being dealt with fully also ties into that Bible prophecy, and that you see the ultimate destiny of Iran is to be taken care of by Europe.
And the fact that America is taking such public moves to distance itself from the attack and say that we had nothing to do with this, like this was all on Israel, like we knew about it ahead of time, but we told them you're on your own. It's the same message basically that they gave when they negotiated with the Houthis. Like, your war is not our war. Okay, we see eye to eye on some things. We consider you a friend, but we're not getting involved in your wars.
And that did kind of feel weak to me. Again, okay, there's more strength than there was in previous administration, but kind of it felt a bit like, please don't hit me. We didn't do anything. Leave our bases alone. And I mean, that doesn't project a message of strength. I think that brings us back, this point though, brings us back to the other important prophecy that you were about to bring up.
Yes, I actually mentioned in a couple places, Isaiah 9:21 and Zechariah 11:14. First one talks about Manasseh and Ephraim, these two Israelite superpowers, America and Britain, and the United States and Britain. Prophecy, as we plug so often, can explain that, turning against Judah, or the state of Israel today. And Zechariah 11, verse 14 says similar thing, that God is going to break the brotherhood, or break the bands between Judah, the Jews in the Middle East, and their friendship with America. Again, there's so many contradictory statements coming in from either angle on whether President Trump supported this or didn't, etc., etc. But regardless of that, regardless of what he thought, there's obviously a lot of people in the United States, including in his own government, that don't like what happened. And you could tell that just with Mr. Netanyahu's video that he uploaded. This is clip 2.
The increasing range of Iran's ballistic missiles would bring that nuclear nightmare to the cities of Europe and eventually to America. Remember, Iran calls Israel the small Satan. It calls America the great Satan. And this is why for decades it's led millions in the chants of death to Israel and death to America. Today, Israel is responding to those genocidal calls with action and with a call of our own. Long live Israel and long live America.
That's a pretty odd thing to focus on a message that technically the U.S. is claiming they had nothing to do with, except unless you realize that Mr. Netanyahu knows that there's a lot of people in America that need convincing for this, and he's expecting a backlash from some kind from the United States. And again, regardless of what President Trump says, there's a lot of his supporters, a lot of his advisors that are not going to like that Israel did this, and they're going to be whispering things in President Trump's ear to try and rein in Israel. And Bible prophecy doesn't say if Iran is going to be what breaks those brotherhoods, but considering, as you mentioned, America is not even in the picture when Iran becomes this king of the South, becomes this unstoppable force, it could very well have something to do with it.
And I think it ties into this utterly shameful piece of news that we got this week, where Britain, Canada, Australia, I think New Zealand, and Norway, if I remember correctly, all came out and put sanctions on important members of Israel's cabinet. Itamar Ben-Gvir was one of them. Who was the other?
Bezalel Smotrich.
Right. So they put sanctions on these individuals. They said, you can't visit our countries. We're going to freeze all of your assets in our countries. And I mean, I just thought it was one of the most shameful things that Britain has ever done. That you've got Israel fighting against Hamas, fighting against this utterly evil terrorist group, that their entire ideology revolves around killing as many Jews as they have the opportunity to. And they decide to put sanctions on these guys based on things they've said, like based on words. And
these guys have been in power for years now. Like, everybody thought, like, okay, they came from much more hard right parties, and say Netanyahu came from, are they going to be starting like a war against the Arabs or whatever like that? They've been there for years. Very little has happened. Very, very little. They've been quite moderate and have not met those expectations whatsoever.
I think it was Ben-Gvir put a video up on Twitter and kind of condemned the Chamberlains of this world that are doing this. And I think this is worse than Neville Chamberlain. Neville Chamberlain, at least, was going about good intentions in an utterly foolish way. I mean, these guys, if they were around, they'd be putting, in the 1940s, they wouldn't just be appeasing Hitler, they'd be putting sanctions on Churchill for saying mean things about the Nazis. Like, that is literally what they have done here. Hamas is a Nazi party, a Nazi ideology with Islamism thrown in there. And they've put sanctions on these guys because they're saying mean things about them. And then you bring in the left in the United States as well, into this point about the break between the other Israelite powers and Israel in the Middle East and the Jews. You've had where the Democratic Party, for several years, you look at, say, like Bill Clinton, where again, I would in some ways compare him with Chamberlain, utterly misguided and foolish when it comes to things like the peace process and dealing with Yasser Arafat and sitting down with Yasser Arafat. But I don't think that, say, Bill Clinton and the Clinton-era Democratic Party actively disliked Israel, actively hated Israel. But that's changed. And you've got now half of the like the left in America will kind of side with Iran over Israel. I mean, this is what Melanie Phillips just wrote today. If Israel does attack Iran, and obviously she wrote this before the news came out, the West's progressive classes will doubtless find cause to be enraged, not at Iran, the most severe and immediate threat to civilization, but at Israel, its principal designated victim. And that's another part of it where the left have just wholeheartedly gone over to the pro-Iranian, anti-Israel side, and then there's a segment of the right that's kind of on that side as well. So there's one other story we want to talk about today that has not gotten anywhere near the attention that this has, but I think is a nice place to conclude because it does point to the real and practical solution to Israel's dilemma. And that is some very significant comments from Israel's president, Isaac Herzog. So can you tell us about those?
Yes, so on Tuesday, Herzog attended an inauguration for some rabbinical judges in Israel. And in his speech for the inauguration there, he said, partway through, quote, "To you, esteemed rabbis and judges, as important public leaders, you have a vital role in this effort, to stir the hearts of the people and the decision makers and to cry out to the heavens on behalf of the hostages. I call upon you to mobilize and do all in your power, first and foremost, to declare a general day of fasting and prayer for our brothers and sisters held captive by murderers," end quote. Okay, so the president, he doesn't have all the authority in Israel. He's more of a figure the prime minister does, but he's still an important figure, calling for the religious leaders of the country to have a day of prayer and fasting to God for success in what's happening in Gaza. This is certainly in worldwide global policy quite unheard of. Maybe for the leader in the land of the Bible, it's a little bit more expected, but still, we haven't seen anything like this since the war in Gaza began in 2023. And the rabbinate, for their part, said, yes, they're going to do something about this and establish something. We don't have any details yet. We don't have a date. But that's the national focus at this point. And because, again, the rabbinate does have an influence in government, they have their own judges, they have authority over certain jurisdictions, this is basically making a national day of fasting and prayer semi-official policy in Israel. Now, for the problem to be completely fixed, there obviously has to be a lot more going on in Israeli society than just one day. We've spoken on this program before about some of the sins that Israeli society embraces and how a lot of those can be directly correlated with what happened on October 7th. And President Herzog, for his part, he also specifically mentioned that the negotiations with Hamas be blessed and that we be able to get them home through diplomatic means. I mean, Hamas is a very evil organization. They're asking a lot for these in exchange for these hostages. I'm not necessarily sure if God would bless wholeheartedly something like that. But it's still a change in direction that Israel needs to take. That if you believe the Bible, if you believe not just the laws and the teachings of the Bible, but the historical record of God miraculously intervening when his people beseech him, when they humble themselves, when they turn to him in repentance, then you can expect him to respond the same way now. And Mr. Fleury has written an entire booklet called Jerusalem and Prophecy that goes into detail a lot of that, saying that the real wound Israel has is spiritual, that it's not trusting in God, that they're trusting in their own human devised solutions to these problems, and that's why they haven't had success in it for so long. And that if they trust in God, if their view of God in society was a lot more meaningful than, say, talking about the Bible as just a national history without bringing God into the picture, then you would see some reversals in some of these things happening. A verse that King Solomon, said in a prayer dedicating the temple that Mr. Fleury has commented on quite frequently over the years, says this in 2 Chronicles 7, verse 14, quote, "If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land." That promise is just as valid as it was thousands of years ago in Solomon's time as it is now. And it's the ball's in the court of the Israeli people right now, how they follow through with this. But if they respond that way, God promises to respond his way as well.
And that does mean, humble themselves and pray and turn from their wicked ways. I mean, that's the kind of the crucial part there, that Israel, and there is a lot of sin in Israel today. You look at cities like Tel Aviv, and it's Sodom and Gomorrah on the Mediterranean coast. That is one of the key tests, and it's a very good step in the right direction for a president to point the nation to God, to point the nation to fasting. I mean, I was reminded of Isaiah chapter 58, that where the people say, "Wherefore have we fasted?" say they, "and you see not. Wherefore have we afflicted our soul, and you take no knowledge? Behold, in your fast you find pleasure, and you extract all your labors." You can't fast and then keep going about your life and doing everything that you used to do. It says, "You shall not fast as you do this day, to make your voice to be heard on high." But instead, there needs to be change. And it goes on, God says, "It's not this the fast I have chosen, to loose the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free, that you break every yoke." You keep going, you get to Isaiah 59 and verse 1. "Behold, the Eternal's hand is not shortened that it cannot save, nor his ear heavy that it cannot hear." God can save Israel today, just as he has anciently, exactly as you were saying. "But your iniquities have separated between you and your God, and your sins have hid his face from you, that he will not hear." And really, this is the message all behind the resurgence and Donald Trump coming back. And that's even opened the door for Israel to carry out this strike potentially. And if he hadn't have won the election, maybe they wouldn't have even been able to do this. That God is given some temporary reprieve to allow for a message to go out. Isaiah 58 and verse 1 says, "Cry aloud, spare not, lift up your voice like a trumpet, show my people their transgressions and the house of Jacob their sins." It allows this message to go out to show the sins. But now people have to use that time to repent and to change. And really that, Israel wants more than a temporary reprieve that comes from bombing Iran and permanent safety. There is a way for that. God can provide that. Doesn't matter what the rest of the world thinks. Doesn't matter if the entire rest of the world gangs up on Israel. Doesn't matter if America gangs up and turns against Israel. God can provide that safety. But only if Israel repent and change and turn from their wicked ways. And that applies to the Jews in the Middle East. That applies to Britain. That applies to America. That applies to individuals. Doesn't matter what the rest of the world does. That can apply to you and to me. And God can save you from your problems. But it requires sincere, wholehearted repentance and the willingness to look at yourself and say, "I've been wrong. I have done wrong. I have sinned." Isaiah 58 goes on to talk about the Sabbath day, keeping the Sabbath day. I mean, that's who today keeps the Sabbath on a Saturday, the way that the Bible commands, and is willing to look at themselves, look at all of society, look at, for most people, the way they've been brought up and say, "Well, no, actually, that's wrong. I need to conform to what the Bible says." That's the kind of repentance that God is talking about. And then keeping the Sabbath the way God commands, rather than, the Jews have a whole lot of their own rituals around that day, but doing it the way that God talks about in the Bible. So there is a solution, and it's a wonderful and it's a practical solution for Israel as a nation, for individuals. So thank you very much for that, Mihailo. I think the other massive story this week that's really dominated the news has been the rioting within the United States, especially in Los Angeles, where there's been some quite significant violence. You've had dozens arrested, and then a whole lot of controversy about calling out the National Guard and President Trump's response. So to hear about all of that, we'll turn to our US correspondent, Andrew Miiller.
Yeah, Los Angeles has been consumed by riots for about a solid week now. The riots are now spreading to other cities, and they are continuing. I think they've slowed down a little bit. So the only reason, like you said, it's not the top news story is that something even bigger happened in Iran. But these riots, they started a week ago in protest to U.S. Immigration's Customs and Enforcement raids to deport illegal immigrants. In particular, there was some arrest made at a hardware store. I believe it was a Home Depot in the Los Angeles area that are is being cited as at least as the excuse for these protests. And if you see the video footage, and it's pretty easy to find, just lots of like billowing smoke, especially around police fires. There's targeting of police cars to set on fire, and immigrants on overpasses throwing rocks again at the police cars. A lot of them draped in either the Mexican flag or the Palestinian flag or the Soviet flag, and chanting slogans about how you're not going to be able to deport them. That's interesting angle to this that a number of people have pointed out that it seems very strange for people who are allegedly claiming that they're patriotic Americans, even if they did come here illegally, that they don't want to be deported. You'd seem like they'd be waving an American flag instead of actually waving Mexican flags and Palestinian flags and Soviet flags. But as people dig into this, a number of the chanters are pointing out that California was once part of Mexico before 1830. And so they're not coming at this like, well, we're patriotic Americans who don't want to be deported. They're coming at this as like, no, this land belongs to us, not to the U.S. government. And we're not going to let the U.S. government get rid of us or send us back to the country whose flag we are pledging allegiance to. One pretty good investigative research on Twitter, they just go by the handle at Data Republican, did quite a bit of digging into this, found out that a lot of the signs are actually made by the Party of Socialism for Liberation. It's a small but radical communist party in America that believes that American capitalism cannot be overthrown gradually from within, like Barack Obama oft agitated for, but rather has to be overthrown in a violent revolution. So this particular Communist Party makes a lot of signs for protest like this, and is working with other agencies that have actually like told the immigrants where to go and what to do. Anything like this involves a pretty good level of central planning. It's not just that ICE raided a Home Depot and everyone got so mad that they got out in the street at the exact same time, at the exact same place, with the exact same sign, with the exact same logo. There's some pre-planning for this. In some cases, sponsored by violent Marxists wanting to overthrow the U.S. government. And in other cases, actually being by these protesters who believe that California, Nevada, Arizona, Texas, New Mexico are all part of Mexico anyway. And actually, those supporters received some pretty high-profile support from the president of the Mexican Senate. So, second or third highest elected position in Mexico, came out, gave a speech in support of the protesters, accusing Donald Trump of not showing dignity of ignorance, and actually showing a printed map of the borders of Mexico before the U.S.-Mexican War in the 1830s. Saying that he actually once told Donald Trump that he wants to build a wall between the U.S. and Mexico, and he's even willing that Mexico could pay for the wall like Donald Trump asked for, but he wants the wall to go north of California, all the way across to about Texas and down, showing that this really is a foreign invasion by those who have not accepted the Treaty of Guadalupe, and claiming that pretty much the entire Southwest United States still belongs to the Republic of Mexico.
So, how serious was the violence? Because I know that's something that's been hotly contested this week with some the governors, Gavin Newsom, Los Angeles mayor, kind of saying, it's a minor protest that's been blown up by President Trump for his own ends, versus all the way up to we need to consider kind of introducing the Insurrection Act because it's a violent insurrection, and certainly, as you said, with links to foreign countries and people that want parts of America to be part of a foreign country.
Yeah, well, I haven't seen any death statistics yet. There might be a few, but there's definitely not many people killed in this type of violence. They usually wait till the violence is over before the insurance companies start putting a number on the damage done. Just from the footage I've seen, I mean, it seems like there's got to be like in the dozens of police cars that have been destroyed. So it's going to be considerable damage and a pretty serious protest that is now spreading to other cities. I think Seattle and some of other cities in on the West Coast are starting to experience similar problems. So it is a serious protest. It is a strange situation just due to the political division in America right now. Is normally this type of protest wouldn't be severe enough to necessitate the president of the United States to send in the National Guard to push down. Is normally something that like state law enforcement has the ability to put down themselves. But just because the governor of California, Kevin Newsom, is so liberal and so pro-immigrant, he hasn't done anything. And some of the news coverage of this, I saw like Rachel Maddow saying that this is part of the joyful resistance against President Donald Trump. There's another much lesser known news broadcaster who said that Donald Trump is blowing this out of proportion and sending the National Guard in to deal with some people who are just having fun burning police cars. And so you're definitely looking at the media, which has been very against Donald Trump's deportation agenda, very pro Joe Biden's open border, saying that these people are just having fun, burning police cars. It's some harmless fun, and they're really trying to downplay the violence. So I think Donald Trump's decision to send in the National Guard and even some Marines isn't so much a statement that we need this level of firepower to deal with some punks burning police cars, as it is a show of force to the entire network of sanctuary cities, liberal journalists, Democratic governors who have not only been supporting Joe Biden's open border policies and actively resisting all of Donald Trump's attempts to deport illegal immigrants, that Donald Trump is actually serious about this. Because there are something like probably between 15 and 30 million illegal immigrants. A Yale study estimated that. And so if you did have a situation where the president of Mexican Senate's declaring the Southwest United States as lawfully part of Mexico and is encouraging illegal immigrants to revolt with the support of U.S. Democrats and the U.S. media, it could turn into something a serious national threat that would logistically require the Marine Corps and the federalization of the National Guard to deal with. So I think Donald Trump's kind of trying to nip that in the bud and make sure it doesn't get that bad by saying that even though Gavin Newsom and ABC News and some of these other liberal news networks don't want the National Guard in California, I want to send a signal to all the millions of illegals that could be revolting that this is what you're up against.
So we talked a lot about illegal immigration in the run-up to the US election last year. We had immigration on the cover of two of our different trumpet prints. I think you wrote the cover article for at least one of those, where we pointed at the scale of the migration that has been happening under the Biden administration, the number of foreign young men pouring across the border, and talked about the agenda behind that. It showed that this was not an accidental crisis. This was something where the borders were deliberately being opened wide. And what we saw after Donald Trump coming into office and how easily he got those figures down so quickly, you're showing that this was a very easily solvable problem, and that this wasn't just the Biden administration being incompetent. This was a deliberate policy. And then you have to start asking the question, why would you deliberately flood America with young military-aged men? Could there be a sinister agenda behind that? So we had all of that last year, and now we're starting to see some of this violence on the street. I mean, are we starting to see then the consequences of mass migration during the Obama-Biden administration? And how much worse? Like, how do you think this could and will develop?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. I wrote that article, like illegal border invasion exposed, last summer. I wrote it after our editor-in-chief, Mr. Jared Fleury, had a section of one of his sermons talking about how Barack Obama was deliberately importing soldiers into the United States from Latin America to basically fight in a socialist revolution. And shortly after he gave that sermon, I watched a documentary by a journalist from Muckrakers who was either very brave or very foolhardy or both, who actually flew down to Ecuador, flew down to Ecuador and came back to the United States with a migrant caravan. And so he had photographic evidence of the United Nations passing out boots and food and medical supplies and maps to the United States, basically showing that the United Nations wasn't just trying to feed the hungry and help the sick and some refugee camps, but was actively facilitating immigrants around the world moving into the United States, even giving them bus tickets so they could get across Central America. And the leader of the UN's Organization for Migration is actually a former Obama administration official. So if you're looking at like Barack Obama's plot to import soldiers into the United States, the people in Homeland Security who were letting the immigrants into the United States were former Obama officials. And the people in the UN down in Ecuador and Colombia and Guatemala, like helping these immigrants get to the United States, were also former Obama administration officials. So the entire supply chain from Ecuador into the United States was run by Obama alumni. And you do have to stop and ask, well, why is he doing this? This isn't just, some hungry kids from Guatemala came here and now they're here and we have to take care of them. But they're actually passing out maps to people from India and the Congo and all over the world who are flying to Ecuador to come here. And if you're looking at this in the policy that Barack Obama is doing this to foment a socialist revolution in the United States, we could almost claim that statement from Mr. Fleury last summer as an already fulfilled prophecy. It's not a huge blown out socialist revolution yet, But a lot of the people whom Obama alumni in the United Nations and Obama alumni in the Biden administration let into the United States have now partnered with a legit Marxist party to start making signs and burning police cars and claiming that California is still part of Mexico. So it's definitely the people involved in this think they're fighting in a socialist revolution to overthrow the United States constitutional system of government. Now, granted, on the big scale of things, there's probably only a couple hundred people fighting in this socialist revolution. So it's not very hard for Donald Trump to send in some Marines and some National Guard and restore order. The Democratic Party is claiming he's taking too extreme actions, but I think he does realize that if he lets these couple hundred people get away with this protest could expand into the millions when you see the number of people whom Obama's accolades in the United Nations and the Biden administration led into the United States.
So we have been warning about the danger of this for some time. Where does the Bible say this is leading?
Well, Isaiah 1 is a prophecy to end times Israel, where Isaiah starts out talking about how oxes know who their owners are and donkeys know where they live, but Israel doesn't know God, who is their father. Then he starts talking about on the curses that come on a nation that doesn't know their father. And in Isaiah 1:7, it specifically says, "Your country lies desolate, your cities are burned with fire. In your very presence, aliens devour your land. It is desolate as overthrown by aliens." That's actually from the Revised Standard Version, the translation there, which I think the King James Version says strangers instead of aliens, but it means the same thing. So whenever you see illegal aliens starting fires in American cities, it just paints a picture that like leaps right off the pages from Isaiah. And I think we've even had a trumpet cover at one point a few years ago with that verse on it, Isaiah, your cities are burned with fire, in regards to some of the like race protest in America. But the prophecy is about strangers or aliens, non-Israelites, who are starting a civil war in the United States. And so we are seeing the beginnings of that here with these Los Angeles protests. And the prophecy is pretty clear that unless America repents and turns from God, this riots are going to spread so big that it actually kills about a third of the people in the United States. Hosea 5 talks about a third of Americans being killed in pestilence and rioting, another third in a foreign German-led military invasion, and a final third being carried away into slavery. So the end of this is very serious if you don't repent. We're currently kind of in the intersection of two prophecies. You've got this Isaiah 1:7 prophecy about your cities burned with fire, and then you've also got a 2 Kings 14 prophecy about a resurgence led by an end time Jeroboam. So all the illegals that Obama let into the nation are still agitating for these Isaiah 1:7 conditions. They're just not getting too far yet because there is an end time Jeroboam figure willing to send in the National Guard and the Marine Corps to at least keep peace temporarily.
So a powerful warning of what is to come. What other stories do you have for us from the English-speaking world?
Yeah, there's a couple other stories. One that I found pretty interesting about just the extent of the corruption during the COVID pandemic. it seems like the two big stories I've been talking about the past week are uh, Elon Musk opposition to the big beautiful bill and all the government waste that's going on, and this invasion of illegal aliens into America, where they actually now found out that when the U.S. government gave out $5 trillion to combat the effects of the COVID lockdowns that they forced people to do, um, about 79 billion of that, um, a single percentage of all the money, but still significant, was given to people who were using either a stolen or a phony social security number. Uh, I imagine a lot of the people who would steal or fake a social security number are probably illegal immigrants who don't actually have a real one. Um, so, just another revelation of just the intense corruption that's driving America towards bankruptcy, and the ripple effects of all the curses unleashed by the government's response to the coronavirus. Um, and I guess just staying on coronavirus news for maybe one thing that's maybe a little more positive is the new director of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Uh, he's pretty much fired everyone on the 17-member advisory board that was pushing for the vaccine mandates. So at the time, the government was saying that everyone who thought there was anything dodgy about the vaccine was an unhinged conspiracy theorist. Now, the U.S. Department of Human Health and Human Services is pretty much admitting that that vaccine was horrible and that everyone on that security board needs to find a new job.
Well, thank you for that, Andrew. One of the big questions we were discussing with our very first item is Israel going it alone? Do they have the backing of the United States with their attack against Iran? Our main story from Asia features, I guess whether or not it's a country is hotly debated, but a part of the world that is seriously thinking about going it alone without the United States. We'll hear more about this from our Asia correspondent, Jeremiah Jacques.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Yes, and in my view, definitely a country. But the big story for Asia that I wanted to speak about was that Taiwan is no longer counting on America to defend it. And the Taiwanese are now preparing to try to fend off China on their own. That is the assessment of a new analysis in The Economist. It's a fascinating piece. It tells the way that Taiwan's strategy for decades has really been to prepare to fend off China on their own for only 1 month. And then after about a month, the United States would have time to arrive and basically save the day. But now, after seeing President Trump's stance toward Ukraine, and the way President Trump is not following through on America's legal obligation to defend Ukraine's borders, and the way he really mocks Ukraine as a small nation that stupidly thinks that it can stand up to a larger neighbor. After seeing all of that, the Taiwanese are now preparing for a much lonelier war and very likely a much longer war as well. The Taiwanese believe that the Ukraine situation is, for one thing, a signal to China that it's a good time for large nations to try to take land and people from their smaller neighbors. And then at the same time, they see it as a signal to smaller countries that they should not expect the United States to help them. And Mr. Trump has mocked Taiwan's capacity to defend itself from China before on a few different occasions. And all of that has given the Taiwanese deep doubts. One section of this Economist article says, Taiwanese confidence that America will arrive at all is growing weaker by the day, end quote. And so as a result, the Taiwanese are in overdrive now, just preparing to go it alone. They are stockpiling food and medicine and fuel. They're also regularly holding drills just to try to prepare the population for how to withstand long-term blackouts and sieges, things of that nature. And it's interesting because, on one hand, we may think that China has been kind of sobered by watching Russia struggle so terribly for more than 3 years to prevail against their much smaller neighbor, Ukraine. And it is certain that Russia's failure has given the Chinese pause, but that doesn't mean that the Chinese have given up their ambitions to conquer Taiwan. Really, the only thing that the Ukraine lesson has taught to China is that when they strike, they have to strike extremely quickly and heavily. They've learned that they need something like blitzkrieg if they want to conquer the nation before the world has time to react. And then the Taiwanese, on the other hand, have learned basically the corollary to that same lesson. They've learned that they have to somehow survive for months and months. They have to hold on for long enough so that China's legitimacy begins to be challenged, and so that other nations would have the time to kind of summon the will to come and help them. Perhaps this would be Japan. Perhaps it would be Australia, South Korea. We don't know exactly who, but Taiwan is now planning to just hold out for as long as they can so that other nations would have the chance to consider, do we want China to just be able to run roughshod over, over this region? But they've also learned that even after help does arrive, they expect the war to last a long, long time. One other section of this Economist article says, the Taiwanese point to Ukraine's starkest lesson: survival is a long game, end quote. So it is a very sobering reality that the Taiwanese are facing, having realized that the US is not a nation that they can count on anymore. And Trump editor-in-chief Gerald Flurry has actually been writing about the China-Taiwan standoff for more than 25 years now. And he places the United States right at the heart of this dynamic, because he acknowledges that the US is really the only thing for decades that's been keeping China from just using sheer military force to step in and seize Taiwan. Back in 1998, Mr. Fleury pointed to some statements that President Bill Clinton said at that time that were basically just publicly opposing Taiwan's independence. And at that time, Mr. Fleury called the Taiwanese, quote, our freedom-loving friends. And he made very clear in that article that America absolutely should support Taiwan. But he said that Bill Clinton's statement showed that it was really just a matter of time before China would absorb this nation. And he said that that was sure to happen because of what he called, quote, a pitifully weak-willed America. And he also explained that his view of this entire situation is based on Bible prophecy, and specifically a passage in Leviticus 26 that talks about America in the modern era having lost the will to use its power. And we do have a free booklet. It's called Russia and China in Prophecy. And there's a whole section in there about China and Taiwan. It's all based on Mr. Gerald Fleury's comments about this flashpoint. So I would encourage anyone who doesn't have a copy of that to order your free copy of Russia and China in Prophecy and just learn all about the big picture context of this dynamic.
Thank you for that, Jeremiah. And of course, just how the Donald Trump's presidency is impacting the world is the subject of our latest Trumpet print, with an introduction from Mr. Gerald Fleury on that subject. Mr. Hilliker and I have an article there going into all the very many ways that Mr. Trump's presidency is accelerating Bible prophecy, and that's just one more that you've shared with us. Well, I mean, the big story, I guess, from Asia that's grabbed a lot of people's attention this week has been the stunning plane crash in India, with nearly 300 people dying and one person almost miraculously surviving. But that's, those stories, they're definitely shocking, they're definitely sad, they're not necessarily full of geopolitical import. So what other stories from Asia, Jeremiah, do we need to know about?
Yes, first up, a quick story here about North Korea. North Korea, of course, is a nuclear nation. That is a disturbing reality that the world has had to live with now for almost 20 years. And this week, we learned that North Korea has a new site for uranium enrichment. That's according to a new report by the IAEA. And this shows that North Korea is intent on expanding its nuclear arsenal, and that it could very soon have many more warheads than it currently does. And this new enrichment facility is even more alarming, I think, because this week we also learned that North Korea's missiles are becoming far more accurate. Many of those missiles have been used against Ukraine over the last year. North Korea sends them to Russia, and then the Russians fire them at Ukraine's apartments and other civilian targets. And Ukraine said this week that in the early months, the North Korean missiles were wildly inaccurate and they had about a 50% failure rate. But now that is changing. Russia has helped North Korea to sharply improve its missile technology. And these same missiles can be armed with nuclear warheads. So not only is North Korea preparing to enrich more uranium, to build more nuclear warheads, but it's also dramatically improving the delivery systems, the missiles that launch those nuclear warheads onto their enemies. And then one final story here about Russian President Vladimir Putin. An interview was released on Monday saying that Putin has approved a new strategy, a landmark strategy really, for the long-term development of Russia's Navy. The Russian Navy is the third most powerful in the world after the US and China, and it has suffered some serious losses during Russia's war with Ukraine, but improving it remains a very high priority for President Putin. So the new plan is looking ahead really for decades and just planning to keep the Russian Navy going strong for all that time. And this is very sensitive information, so Russia has not released the details, the specifics of what this plan entails. But the head of Russia's Maritime Collegium said the new strategy is central to defining the future role and image of the Russian Navy in its efforts to secure Russian interests worldwide. So, Putin's ambitions are global, and he plans to have the maritime power to achieve them.
Well, thank you very much for that, Jeremiah. And I wanted to finish up with another story of global maritime import, another seagate, like Hong Kong or like Taiwan is. And that is some important news about Gibraltar. Gibraltar will soon lie behind European borders, at least according to an agreement that Britain and Spain reached at a preliminary level this week. Britain's Foreign Secretary David Lammy was in Gibraltar over the course of this week to hammer out an agreement as to what this, or to finalize an agreement as to what this looks like after Brexit. It's going to remain British territory, but British citizens flying to Gibraltar from the UK will have to show their passport in order to do so. And Spanish border guards there can deny them entry. Now, this will allow the 15,000 Spanish workers who cross the border into Gibraltar daily to continue to do so. The Telegraph cited anonymous sources saying that this is the closest that we've ever been to a deal. So Britain has this territory on paper, but do we really own it if a British citizen has to show their passport to a foreign border guard in order to get to it? I guess it's still British territory because Britain could revoke that agreement at some point in the future, but it is a major step towards giving Gibraltar away. And that is a critical forecast from Herbert W. Armstrong. In United States and Britain and Prophecy, he talks a lot about these different sea gates because of Bible prophecies given to Israel, where God says, very specifically, you're going to gain control over the gates of your enemies. And what do gates of your enemies mean in a national context? It means choke points like the Straits of Gibraltar, where you can close down ships coming in and out of the Mediterranean Sea. Taiwan is an important sea gate off the coast of China. The Panama Canal, the Suez Canal, islands like Malta, Cyprus, so many of these strategic bits of territory. And you look at who owned them, and that shows you who is Israel in the Bible, because God promised Abraham and Isaac and Jacob that they would have these sea gates. So it shows you where Israel is. It's powerful proof of Bible prophecy, but God said that if these nations didn't obey, they'd be taken away. And that is exactly what we're seeing. Mr. Armstrong wrote in the United States and Britain in Prophecy, as the pride of our power continues to be broken, as the British continue to lose their foreign sea gates and possessions around the earth, as America signs away ownership of the Panama Canal, control over this vital sea gate, this focal prophecy alone represents giant proof as to where the modern remnant of the peoples of Israel reside today. So I think it's a sad story in a lot of ways, seeing Britain giving away its territory, and this is territory that Britain has used to help bring a lot of freedom to the world, and it's going to be a curse to the whole world in the hands of this rising European power. But it's also a massive signpost of fulfilled prophecy and of God doing his will and working in world events. And another story I just wanted to update you with quickly at the end, as we've kind of spent a fair bit of time on our bigger stories this week, as it has sadly been a very violent week for Europe. So in Germany on Saturday, you had an Iraqi national drive his car into his wife and his 5-year-old daughter. That's believed to be part of a custody dispute. You had a 30-year-old woman try to stab a passerby in Munich before being shot dead by police. There was a Slovenian man the same day in Germany. He bought a knife in a shop near Hamburg before attacking a man at the same shop. You had 10 people killed in a school shooting in Graz in Austria. One of the worst bits of mass violence that Austria has ever seen in its history. The suspect was a 22-year-old former student. He was shot and then killed himself. The Austrian president said that it had hit Austria right in the heart. And the last major shooting was 5 years ago, when you had 4 killed in a terrorist attack in Vienna. So a very big deal for Austria. And then France, you had a French teaching assistant stabbed to death by a 15-year-old student during a bag check. And concerns over violence have led France to introduce bag checks at some schools across the country. They've confiscated 186 knives over the last few months. And here it had fatal consequences. 15-year-old stabbing one of their teachers. So you have various different outbreaks. I mean, all of these have different causes. Some is related to migration and people coming in from the third world and different cultures and even Islamist terrorist attacks. Some have nothing to do with that. The school shooting, I don't think there's any evidence that it's a disgruntled former pupil. But certainly there's a growing feeling in Europe that governments are losing control, that violence is getting worse, that they need a strong hand, that they need law and order. And really, this is a curse all over the planet. And has been for years. I mean, has there ever, things get better, things get worse, but has there ever been a time where the world's been free of violence? I mean, it points to the need for what all of these different events that we've been talking about this week tie into: the return of Jesus Christ and the bringing of an all-powerful, loving government all over the earth. And all of these events are designed to help mankind to repent and to submit to that law and that government. So Europe, America, Britain, we all need that future. But also you can see these kind of events fueling Europe's appetite for a strong leader and having someone that can bring law and order, that can protect people, that can help people that are feeling unsafe right now. Now, that's not going to work out for the world's benefit or Europe's benefit in the short term, but it is all part of that plan leading to the return of Jesus Christ. And again, we have our booklet, A Strong German Leader is Imminent. Well, so many big stories this week. That's just been a quick rundown for Europe, but we are very rapidly over time even, so we better wrap this up quickly. Thank you so much for joining us as we point out all of these bits of important news in the context of Bible prophecy. The King of the South, I'll mention that book again, is your key to understanding what's happening in the Middle East and Iran. And if you really want to, now is the time, now is a great time to dig into that with Iran on the news. That shows you where this is leading and, more importantly, why. Why a loving God allows all this violence in the Middle East and this seemingly insoluble peace crisis, peace process, where no one can bring peace to the Middle East. That book shows you what God is doing and how God plans to bring peace to the Middle East and beyond. You can get that on our website, thetrumpet.com. If you just go to the top right at literature and click there and then click from showcase to all, you can go and find that. We'll put a link to it in the show notes, and we'll be very happy to ship that out to you wherever you are in the world. Well, thank you very much to all of our panelists. Thank you to George Haddad for engineering and production. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions or comments, you can get in touch with us at trumpetworld@thetrumpet.com. We'll be back with our regular show on Wednesday. And until then, keep watching your world.